A blonde body floats in Santiago Bay. The Matinee Lady has given her last performance. January 13th, 1985. Manzanillo, Mexico. The Pacific Ocean rolls endlessly toward the shore, its rhythm broken only by the search helicopter circling overhead. 3 days earlier, Carol Wayne had vanished from a beachside resort. Now she drifts face down in the dark water, her platinum hair fanned out like seaweed, her famous smile finally silenced beneath the waves. This is not how America's favorite dumb blonde was supposed to exit the stage. Carol Wayne, the woman who had made millions laugh with her dizzy persona on The Tonight Show, who had become the embodiment of beautiful confusion, was found dead at 42 under circumstances that would never be explained to anyone's satisfaction. The Mexican authorities ruled it an accidental drowning. Case closed. But the evidence whispered a different story, one of unexplained bruises, missing time, and a woman who had told friends she was tired of being the joke and wanted to disappear forever. The last person to see her alive was Edward Durston, a man with a disturbing history of being present when young blonde actresses met mysterious ends. Was Carol Wayne's death really a tragic accident, or the final scene in a conspiracy that had been decades in the making? The truth lies buried beneath the waves of Santiago Bay, along with the question that haunts Hollywood still. When does playing dumb become deadly? But to understand how the Matinee Lady's final performance ended in Mexican waters, we must first understand how a girl from Chicago became trapped in the prison of her own joke. September 9th, 1942. Chicago, Illinois. Lake Michigan's harsh winds rattle the windows of a modest apartment where dreams feel as fragile as the glass they threaten to shatter. In this cramped space that smells of her father's factory clothes and her mother's endless sewing, Carol Marie Feuerman takes her first breath into a world that will teach her that being someone else pays better than being yourself. Her father comes home with calloused hands and tired eyes. Her mother hunches over piecework late into the night, and somewhere between the sound of her parents' worried whispers about money and the distant laughter from the radio shows they can't afford to attend, young Carol learns her first lesson. Entertainment is an escape from reality, and reality is something to be escaped from. At 3, she's already performing for anyone who will watch, twirling in makeshift costumes made from her mother's fabric scraps, demanding applause like it's oxygen. The neighbors laugh and call her a little ham, but there's something unsettling about the calculated way she studies their reactions, filing away what works and discarding what doesn't. The local skating rink becomes her laboratory for creating the perfect performance. On ice, she discovers she can become someone else. Someone graceful, someone worthy of attention, someone who makes people gasp with wonder rather than worry about rent money. The prison of the joke hasn't been built yet, but the blueprint is already being drawn in sequins and spotlight. By her teenage years, Carol has developed the qualities that will both make her famous and ultimately destroy her. An desperate need to be loved, an intuitive understanding of what audiences want, and an almost pathological inability to exist without external validation. She's beautiful, but more than that, she's magnetic in a way that makes people want to watch her even when she's doing nothing at all. She played the part so well that everyone forgot to ask who Carol really was. By the time she joined the Ice Capades at 17, the question had become irrelevant. There was only the performance, and the performance was all anyone wanted to see. Could their early childhood experiences have laid the foundation for later triumphs or tragedies? For Carol, the answer was written in ice and sequins and the desperate applause of crowds who loved her image but would never know her truth. The Ice Capades years teach her the most dangerous lesson of her life, that being beautiful and entertaining is more valuable than being real. It's a lesson that will follow her to Hollywood, to television stardom, and ultimately to a lonely beach in Mexico where the waves don't care how pretty you are or how much audiences love you. The spotlight hits the ice rink like a religious revelation, and 17-year-old Carol Wayne glides into its embrace with the desperation of someone who has finally found home. The Ice Capades audience erupts in applause, but if you look closely at her face during the bow, you can see something that will haunt her for the rest of her life. The exact moment she realizes that their love is conditional on her never being real. The sequined costume catches every beam of light, transforming her into a living jewel that sparkles and dazzles but reveals nothing of substance beneath. She has learned to be beautiful, graceful, entertaining, everything except herself. The prison of the joke is under construction, and Carol is both the architect and the prisoner, building her own cage one performance at a time. When Hollywood scouts come calling, they see exactly what she has trained them to see. A gorgeous blonde who moves like a dream and seems blissfully unaware of her own sexuality. They don't see the intelligent young woman who choreographs her own routines, who studies audience reactions like a scientist, who has turned performance into survival. The joke isn't that she's dumb. The joke is that everyone believes she is. Los Angeles shimmers with possibility and broken dreams in equal measure when Carol arrives at 20. She's tall, blonde, and blessed with the kind of curves that make photographers weak in the knees. But what she really wants is to be taken seriously as an actress. The Hollywood that greets her is a machine designed to chew up beautiful young women and spit out their bones, but Carol has something that many other aspiring actresses lack. She's genuinely funny. Her breakthrough comes through the most unlikely of sources. A talent scout for The Tonight Show catches her act at a small comedy club in West Hollywood, where she's performing a routine about the hazards of being blonde in a world that assumes beauty equals stupidity. The material is sharp, self-aware, and delivered with a wink that suggests Carol is very much in on the joke. But the joke is about to become her jailer. Was the success they achieved truly worth all the pain they endured? For Carol, the question becomes more pressing as she enters the golden cage of television stardom, where the very qualities that make her valuable also make her a prisoner of others' expectations. The Tonight Show, Burbank, California. Behind the curtain, Carol Wayne adjusts her sequined dress and takes a breath that tastes like stage makeup and desperation. When Johnny Carson calls her name, she steps into the blazing lights as the Matinee Lady, and 20 million Americans see exactly what she has trained them to see. A breathtaking blonde who reads product endorsements with such innocent sensuality that no one notices the genius of her performance. And now here's the Matinee Lady to tell us about Elbows McGillicuddy's Hair Tonic, Carson announces, and Carol glides to center stage like she's floating on air. Her delivery is flawless, every pause calculated, every inflection designed to maximize the comedy while maintaining the illusion of accidental humor. The audience erupts in laughter, and Carol basks in their adoration while dying a little inside. They love her, but they love a lie. The real Carol, the one who writes much of her own material, who understands comedic theory better than most male comedians, who could discuss philosophy or politics if anyone cared to listen, remains invisible behind the platinum hair and the vacant smile. The prison of the joke has found its perfect inmate. She's famous, she's wealthy, she's beloved, and she's disappearing more completely with each passing show. She played dumb so convincingly that everyone forgot to ask if she was pretending. The joke was on America, but the punchline was killing her. Her appearances on Carson's show become events that audiences anticipate with the enthusiasm usually reserved for championship sporting events. She sells ridiculous products with such sincere enthusiasm that the humor writes itself. Aunt Blabby's Miracle Hair Remover, Uncle Weird's Love Tonic, Dr. Bombay's Gorilla Pills. Each absurd product becomes comedy gold in her hands, delivered with such breathless conviction that audiences never question the sophisticated comedic intelligence required to make such material work. But what makes Carol's performances truly brilliant and truly tragic is the layer of intelligence that lurks just beneath the surface. Those who watch carefully can see her making split-second decisions about timing, emphasis, and physical comedy that reveal a sharp, comedic mind at work. She's not just playing dumb, she's playing someone playing dumb, and the complexity of that performance is lost on most audiences who see only the beautiful blonde getting laughs. The irony is exquisite and devastating. Carol has become so good at pretending to be stupid that she's made millions of people feel smarter than they actually are. Her Matinee Lady character serves as a mirror that reflects back audiences' sense of intellectual superiority, and they love her for it. But the cost of providing that service is the systematic erasure of her actual self. Behind the scenes, those who work with her discover something that never makes it onto the air. Carol is actually the smartest person in the room. She writes much of her own material, understands comedic theory better than most male comedians, and can discuss everything from politics to philosophy with surprising depth. But none of that matters to an audience that has fallen in love with her image of beautiful confusion. The Tonight Show dressing room becomes her confessional, where she sits before mirrors rimmed with bright bulbs and slowly transforms herself from Carol Fuhrman into the Matinee Lady. Each night she applies more than makeup. She applies amnesia, forgetting a little more of who she used to be until only the character remains. Her film career follows the same predictable pattern. Hollywood sees her as a type rather than an actress, and that type is always the same. The beautiful blonde whose main function is to look gorgeous while saying silly things. She appears in comedies where her role is essentially an extension of her Tonight Show persona, beach movies where her primary qualification is looking good in a bikini, and B-grade productions that exist solely to capitalize on her television fame. The roles offer no artistic satisfaction, but Carol takes them anyway because they pay well and because she's forgotten how to say no to being the Matinee Lady. Each film reinforces the prison bars of her public image, making it harder to imagine any other way of existing in the entertainment industry. Carol begins to speak privately about her frustration with being typecast, but her complaints fall on deaf ears. Her managers and agents remind her that she's making excellent money playing a role that millions of women would kill for. Why fix what isn't broken? Why rock a boat that's carrying everyone toward financial success? The personal cost becomes apparent in her relationships. Men are attracted to her because of her image, but they're consistently disappointed when they discover that the real Carol is more complex, more intelligent, and more needy than the character they've fallen in love with on television. She finds herself in a series of relationships with men who seem to resent her for not being as simple as she appears on screen. Her marriage to photographer Barry Feinstein in 1965 represents an attempt to find authenticity in a world built on performance. Feinstein, known for his work with rock stars and celebrities, seems to understand the difference between image and reality. But even he struggles with the disconnect between the woman he married and the character she plays professionally. The marriage becomes another casualty of her success. How do you have an intimate relationship with someone when your professional identity is built on being a fantasy rather than a person? How do you maintain authentic communication when your most valuable skill is making people believe you're someone you're not? Their divorce in 1970 follows the same pattern as most of Carol's relationships. Initial attraction to her celebrity, followed by confusion about her actual personality, followed by disappointment when the reality doesn't match the fantasy. She's learning that her greatest professional asset is also her greatest personal liability. Behind all that glamour, was there an unbearable loneliness that nobody saw? Those closest to Carol during this period describe a woman who was genuinely warm and funny in private, but who seemed to be searching for something she couldn't quite name. She had achieved every external marker of success, but the internal satisfaction remained elusive. Her social circle consists primarily of other industry professionals, comedians, actors, writers, producers. While these relationships are genuine in their way, they're also fundamentally professional. based on mutual benefit rather than unconditional support. The kind of deep, intimate friendships that provide emotional sustenance become nearly impossible when everyone in your life has a professional stake in your success. Carol's relationship with her son becomes complicated by her fame. She wants to be a good mother, but she's also conscious of maintaining the image that supports their lifestyle. The child grows up seeing his mother as two different people, the loving, intelligent woman at home and the ditzy blonde on television. The confusion this creates will affect their relationship for years to come. Her drinking, which had started as a social activity and occasionally as a professional tool to access the giggly persona that audiences loved, begins to take on a different character during the height of her success. It becomes a way to numb the growing dissonance between her public and private selves, a method of dealing with the stress of maintaining a false persona 24 hours a day. The alcohol helps her access the kind of uninhibited state that the matinee lady requires, but it also makes her more likely to let the mask slip in ways that make everyone uncomfortable. Friends notice that she's drinking earlier in the day more frequently and with a desperation that suggests she's medicating something deeper than career pressure. The money is good, better than good. Carol is earning more than most serious dramatic actresses. But material success can't fill the growing void where her authentic self used to live. Her personal relationships become casualties of her public persona. Men are drawn to her because of her image, but they're disappointed when they discover that the real Carol is more complex, more intelligent, and more needy than the character they've fallen in love with on television. As the cultural landscape of the 1970s shifts toward more complex portrayals of women in entertainment, Carol finds herself increasingly out of step with the times. The feminist movement is challenging the very stereotypes that her career has been built on, while a new generation of female comedians like Joan Rivers and Lily Tomlin are proving that women can be funny without playing into male fantasies about feminine stupidity. Carol watches this evolution with a mixture of admiration and terror. She sees what she could have been if she had been born 10 years later, if she had entered the business when the rules were different, if she had been brave enough to refuse the gilded cage when it was first offered to her. But by now, the matinee lady isn't just her most famous character. It's become her only marketable skill in an industry that values brands over people. The money begins to create its own problems. The lifestyle that her success has made possible requires constant maintenance, and the pressure to keep earning at the same level becomes overwhelming. She buys a house in the Hollywood Hills that she can barely afford, maintains wardrobes that cost more than most people's annual salaries, and surrounds herself with the kind of luxury that makes it impossible to imagine living any other way. But the financial success also becomes a trap. Every month brings new expenses, new obligations, new reasons why she can't afford to stop being the matinee lady. The character that was supposed to provide freedom from her working-class Chicago background has instead created a different kind of economic prison, one built from silk and sequins but no less confining than the tenement apartment where she grew up. Her attempts at artistic growth are met with resistance from everyone who profits from her image. When she expresses interest in dramatic roles, agents remind her that audiences won't accept her as anything other than a comedic figure. When she suggests developing new characters, producers insist that the matinee lady is what sells. When she talks about wanting to be taken seriously as an actress, everyone in her professional circle acts as though she's suffering from delusions of grandeur. The prison of the joke tightens its grip with each passing year. Carol begins to experience what psychologists would later recognize as a form of dissociation, where the performer and the person become so separated that neither feels completely real. She can access the matinee lady persona instantly, like flipping a switch, but she has increasing difficulty remembering who she was before the character existed. Her second marriage to producer Burt Sugarman in 1976 represents another attempt to find stability and authenticity. Sugarman, creator of The Midnight Special, understands the entertainment industry better than most, and Carol hopes he'll be able to see past her public image to the woman underneath. But even this relationship becomes complicated by the demands of maintaining her career. Sugarman loves Carol the person, but he also needs to work with Carol the brand. Their marriage becomes a complex negotiation between authentic intimacy and professional necessity, and the strain proves impossible to sustain over time. They divorce in 1980, another casualty of Carol's inability to exist as a complete person in a world that only wants her to be a fragment of herself. The late 1970s bring subtle but unmistakable signs that Carol's career is beginning to decline. Her appearances on The Tonight Show become less frequent, not because she's less talented, but because audiences are growing tired of the same routine. The joke that once seemed fresh and transgressive now feels familiar and predictable. Television executives who once fought to book her now return her agents' calls days later with vague excuses about scheduling conflicts and demographic shifts. The industry that created her is beginning to discard her with the same casual indifference with which it had elevated her. She's learning that fame in America is not a permanent condition but a renewable contract, and hers is not being renewed. Her appearances on The Tonight Show become less frequent, and when she does appear, there's something desperate in her performance that wasn't there before. She's trying too hard, pushing too much, overcompensating for the growing sense that she's becoming irrelevant. The effortless charm that once made her segments seem improvised now feels rehearsed and forced. Did this tragic event mark their downfall? Or was it simply the tipping point of deeper problems? For Carol, the changes in the entertainment industry were just the external manifestation of an internal crisis that had been building for years. She had spent so long being what others wanted her to be that she had lost touch with what she wanted for herself. Financial pressures begin to mount as her income decreases and her expenses remain high. The Hollywood lifestyle that her success had made possible requires a level of income that's no longer guaranteed. Carol finds herself taking jobs that she would have rejected during her peak years. Personal appearances at shopping mall openings, guest spots on game shows, anything that trades on her fading celebrity. The transformation from beloved television personality to yesterday's news happens gradually, then suddenly. Carol watches younger comedians take her place on talk shows, notices that her invitations to industry parties become less frequent, realizes that the photographers who once fought to capture her image now barely glance in her direction. The psychological impact is devastating. For someone whose entire sense of self-worth has become dependent on external validation, the gradual withdrawal of that validation feels like slow death. Carol begins to experience panic attacks when she's not performing, as if she only exists when others are watching her. The Matinee Lady has become so central to her identity that without an audience to perform for, she's not sure who she is supposed to be. Her therapist, Dr. Sarah Goldman, tries to help Carol distinguish between her professional persona and her authentic self. But the work is complicated by Carol's genuine confusion about where one ends and the other begins. In session notes that will later be sealed by court order, Goldman writes, "Patient exhibits signs of severe dissociation between public and private identity. Has difficulty accessing authentic emotions without the framework of performance. Expressed fear that there might be nothing underneath the character she's created. The drinking escalates as the career opportunities diminish. What had been social lubrication becomes medicinal necessity, a way to quiet the voices in her head that keep asking uncomfortable questions about identity, purpose, and worth." Carol develops a routine of starting her day with coffee and ending it with wine, with increasing amounts of alcohol in between to manage the growing anxiety of irrelevance. Her financial situation becomes precarious as well. The Hollywood lifestyle she's maintained requires income levels that are no longer sustainable. The house payments, the wardrobe expenses, the beauty treatments necessary to maintain her image, All of it adds up to a monthly nut that grows larger as her earning potential shrinks. Pride prevents her from scaling back her lifestyle in ways that might make financial sense. How can the matinee lady live in a modest apartment or shop at discount stores? The image requires maintenance even when there's no longer a career to justify the expense. 1982 brings a particularly humiliating reminder of her changing status in Hollywood. A magazine profile about Where Are They Now features Carol alongside other has-beens from television's golden age. The article, titled Whatever Happened to the Matinee Lady, treats her as a curiosity from the past rather than a working performer. The accompanying photograph shows her looking tired and older than her years, captioned with the brutal honesty that only entertainment journalists can muster. Carol Wayne, 40, still lives in the shadow of her most famous character. The article devastates her not because it's mean-spirited, but because it's accurate. She is living in the shadow of her own creation, trapped by the very success that was supposed to liberate her. The matinee lady has become a ghost that haunts her daily life, a specter of past glory that makes present reality unbearable by comparison. Her son, now a teenager, begins to express embarrassment about her career. Friends at school make jokes about his mother being the dumb blonde on television, and he starts to understand the disconnect between the intelligent woman who raised him and the character that made her famous. Their relationship becomes strained as he grapples with the complexity of having a parent whose public image contradicts everything he knows about her private character. Carol's attempts to reinvent herself professionally meet with consistent failure. She auditions for dramatic roles but can't convince casting directors to see past her established image. She tries to develop new comedic characters, but audiences reject anything that deviates from their expectations of what Carol Wayne should be. She's trapped in a prison of her own success, unable to move forward but unable to go back to who she was before. The isolation becomes nearly complete. Old friends drift away as her neediness increases and her ability to maintain normal social relationships deteriorates. New friendships prove impossible to develop because Carol can never be certain whether people are interested in her or in meeting the matinee lady. The loneliness becomes so profound that she sometimes performs her old routines alone in her living room, just to remember what it felt like to make someone laugh. Her relationship with Edward Durston begins during this period of maximum vulnerability. A twice-divorced entrepreneur with vague business interests and a history of relationships with troubled women, Durston represents the possibility of connection with someone who claims to see beyond her public image. But his interest in her seems predatory rather than romantic, focused more on what she represents than who she actually is. Their relationship follows a pattern that would be recognized by anyone familiar with emotional abuse. Periods of intense attention and affection alternating with withdrawal and criticism. Durston seems to understand instinctively how to exploit Carol's neediness, offering the validation she craves while systematically undermining her self-confidence in other areas. The drinking, which had started as a professional tool to help her access the giggly persona that audiences loved, becomes a more serious problem. Alcohol offers temporary escape from the prison of her own image, but it also makes her more unpredictable, more likely to let the mask slip in public. Her behavior becomes increasingly erratic. There are stories of Carol showing up late to appearances, forgetting her lines, or breaking character in ways that make audiences uncomfortable. The woman who had once been the most reliable performer on The Tonight Show is becoming someone that producers can't count on. The final months of 1984 find Carol Wayne in a state of increasing desperation, masked by the same bright smile that had charmed America for over a decade. At 42, she's facing the reality that most entertainers dread: irrelevance. The phone calls from agents are fewer, the job offers are smaller, and the recognition she receives on the street carries an undertone of whatever happened to Her financial situation has become precarious in the way that only happens to people who've lived as if the good times would never end. She's forced to take out loans against her dwindling assets, borrowing against a future that looks increasingly uncertain. But perhaps more devastating than the career decline is the growing awareness that she has no idea who she is without the Matinee Lady persona. Carol has spent so many years being a character that the lines between performance and reality have completely blurred. When she looks in the mirror, she sees blonde hair and a famous face, but she can't locate the person underneath all the image management. The romantic relationships that had always been complicated by her fame become impossible as her neediness increases. She finds herself dating men who are attracted to her celebrity rather than her personality. But her celebrity is fading and her personality is buried under decades of performance. Edward Durston enters Carol's life at her most vulnerable moment. He's a twice-divorced entrepreneur with a history of relationships with troubled actresses. A man who seems to specialize in women whose beauty is matched only by their instability. To Carol, desperate for any connection that feels real, he represents possibility. Someone who claims to see beyond her image to the woman underneath. But Edward's history is darker than Carol knows or wants to acknowledge. He was present when Diane Linkletter, daughter of television host Art Linkletter, died in 1969 under circumstances that were never fully explained. He had been the last person to see her alive, just as he would later be the last person to see Carol alive. The pattern should have been a warning, but Carol is too lonely and too desperate to heed warning signs. Her conversations with friends during this period reveal the depth of her despair. She speaks often about being tired of being the joke, about wanting to disappear forever, about feeling trapped in a life that no longer feels like her own. Friends who love her don't know how to help because they're not sure who the real Carol is either. She's been performing for so long that authenticity has become a foreign concept. Can anyone ever truly escape from the shadow of their darkest moments? For Carol, the question has become urgent rather than theoretical. She spent her entire adult life running from the working-class girl from Chicago who dreamed of being taken seriously, and now she's running from the Hollywood blonde who became famous for playing dumb. But you can't run from yourself forever. The decision to go to Mexico in January 1985 seems spontaneous, but those close to her suspect it's part of a larger pattern of running away from problems rather than confronting them. She tells friends she needs to figure things out, to find herself, to start over. The trip to Manzanillo is supposed to be a romantic getaway with Edward, a chance to heal their troubled relationship away from the pressures of Hollywood. Her last conversation with her son before leaving for Mexico is telling. She speaks about wanting to be real for once in her life, about being tired of pretending to be happy when she's not, about needing to find out who she would have been if she had never become Carol Wayne. It's the most honest she's been in years, and it terrifies those who love her because it sounds like someone preparing to say goodbye. Were these final decisions acts of surrender, or courageous acts of self-preservation? The question would haunt everyone who knew Carol after her death, because the woman who got on the plane to Mexico was someone they barely recognized. Not the matinee lady they had watched on television, not the Hollywood socialite they had partied with, but a broken woman desperately searching for something she had lost so long ago she couldn't even remember what it was. January 13th, 1985. Dawn breaks over Santiago Bay like a crime scene photographer's flash. The Pacific Ocean stretches endlessly toward the horizon, its surface broken only by the small form floating face down in the gentle swells. Camera zooms slowly on the platinum hair spread like a halo around Carol Wayne's head. Cut 2. Edward Durston in his hotel room, cigarette burning between steady fingers, his eyes cold as winter lake ice. Back to the beach. Mexican authorities lift a white sheet over the body that had once made America laugh. The waves wash away footprints in the sand, just as Hollywood had washed away the woman behind the performance. Fade to black with only the sound of water against shore. The investigation that follows moves with suspicious speed. Within hours, authorities rule it an accidental drowning. The inconsistencies, unexplained bruises, Durston's shifting timeline, his history with other dead actresses, are noted and ignored with equal efficiency. The woman who had spent her life being overlooked is overlooked one final time. Edward Durston returns to Los Angeles with a story he'll stick to for the rest of his life. Despite its obvious inconsistencies, he portrays himself as a grieving boyfriend who lost the woman he loved to a tragic accident. But those who knew Carol, especially those who knew about her final months, refused to accept the official version of events. Her funeral at Forest Lawn Cemetery becomes a grotesque celebration of the very illusion that destroyed her. Industry colleagues deliver eulogies praising the Matinee Lady, while the real Carol Wayne, the intelligent, desperate woman who had been trapped inside that character, remains as invisible in death as she had become in life. The conspiracy theories that emerge in the weeks and months following her death focus on the obvious questions that the Mexican authorities failed to ask. Why did Edward Durston have a pattern of being present when young actresses died? What really happened during those missing hours between Carol's disappearance and his report to police? Was her death connected to her financial problems, her drinking, or something more sinister? But perhaps the most compelling theory is also the most tragic. That Carol Wayne didn't die from drowning, but from the slow suffocation of living a lie for too many years. The woman who washed up on that Mexican beach had been disappearing long before she entered the water, erased bit by an entertainment industry that loved her image but had no use for her humanity. Did she drown in the ocean, or in the weight of a joke that became her life? The Mexican authorities had no interest in the complexity of that question. For them, a dead blonde was just paperwork to be processed and forgotten. Her death makes headlines as the passing of a television icon, but the coverage focuses almost exclusively on her comedic performances and her status as a sex symbol. The deeper story, the tragedy of a woman who became trapped in her own image, goes largely untold. America mourns Carol Wayne, the character, while ignoring Carol Fuhrman, the person, who had disappeared years before her body was found in Mexican waters. Was their death as straightforward as reported? Or were powerful hidden forces involved? In Carol's case, the hidden forces weren't necessarily human conspirators, but the inexorable machinery of an entertainment industry that creates images and then demands that the people who embody those images sacrifice themselves to maintain them. What hidden secrets might still remain untold behind their public image? Carol Wayne's deepest secret was the simplest and most universal one of all, that she had no idea who she really was. She had spent so many years being what others wanted her to be that when she finally tried to find herself, there was nothing left to find. She lived in the prison of a joke. She died before anyone could hear her truth. The waves of Santiago Bay continue to roll onto the Mexican shore, carrying away secrets and bringing fresh mysteries with each tide. Carol Wayne's death was officially solved within hours, but the real mystery, how a brilliant woman became trapped in a character that slowly erased her, remains as unsolved as the day she floated face down in those dark waters. Her legacy is written in laughter that came at the cost of a life, in the millions who loved an illusion while ignoring the woman who created it. Every performer who has ever felt trapped by their own success, every woman who has ever been valued more for how she looks than who she is, every person who has ever wondered what happened to their authentic self, all of them can see their story reflected in the rise and fall of the Matinee Lady. If a laugh can build a legend but erase a life, what is the real cost of entertainment? The answer floats somewhere in Santiago Bay, where the most beautiful performances end in silence.